Fine, good morning here. I don't know what time it is over there. Happy World Environment Day.
Thank you. Happy World Environment Day. I'm in France, so it's midday here.
Okay, great. It's good to talk to you. Welcome to the Talks for Nature. It's World Environment Day again for 2020, and today we're going to be talking around, of course, the theme of biodiversity, but various issues around it. Um, I'll just quickly read the profile of Eve. Eve, and I hope I get to pronounce this right, Eve de la Mothe Karoubi. Great. Is a senior manager for the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Eve joined the team in 2012 and helps lead the strategy and development of SDSN's networks globally, as well as the work on data and monitoring for the SDGs, including SDG 16 Data Initiative and the Africa SDG Index and Dashboards report. Previously, she had worked for the OECD on capacity building in developing emerging economies, with a particular focus on strengthening governance in post-conflict and fragile states, and on sustainable development in the Sahel and West Africa. In 2007-2008, Eve was an Insights Fellow, an international fellowship program on effective conflict management, during which she worked in Liberia, Thailand, Lebanon, and at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Eve holds a Master's in International Affairs from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, and a BA with honors from Smith College. It's great to have you on, Eve.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, awesome. So Eve, I'll start with this question. You've done considerable work on the SDGs. So with only 10 years to the deadline of Agenda 2030, can you boldly say that Africa is on track towards achieving the Sustainable Development goals? Give any reasons for your answer if you think so. Why do you think so? If you think so.
Sure. Yes. I actually had a few slides to share that can illustrate and support exactly what I'm saying, that essentially Africa is not on track to achieve the SDGs by 2030, not by a long shot. But there's also a lot of disparities and heterogeneity between African countries. And I'd like to share the results of some research that we've done in the context of our SDG index work. So just as a word of background, my organization, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we operate under the auspices of the UN Secretary General, and we are led by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who will be speaking to this webinar a little bit later. And our mission is to mobilize universities, and specifically the scientific and technological and technical expertise, to identify solutions for the SDGs. So we have a global network of knowledge institutions with almost 2,000 universities and research centers around the world, all working on these issues of sustainable development. We also have an online teaching component called the SDG Academy, which offers a number of free resources for teaching the SDGs. And we also do policy analysis, and this is the one that I'm going to be sharing some information about. Are you able, are the slides going through for you? Are you able to see?
Yeah, I can see them.
The slides? Okay, good. So on policy analysis, SDSN has been leading thinking on many different aspects of SDG implementation, including financing, monitoring, getting started with the goals, and also long-term pathways to achieve the goals. This is an example of some of the work we've done on monitoring progress on the SDGs. Our signature report is now called the Sustainable Development Report. It used to be known as the SDG Index and Dashboards Report. We've had 4 global editions of that report, And we've also developed a number of continental editions. So there's an Africa report, which I'm going to address in more detail, an Arab region report, and a Latin America report, which is forthcoming, as well as a number of subnational editions looking at different cities and different states within countries and also within the European Union. So a few words on the Africa SDG Index. It was first published in 2018. The 2019 report had a special focus on SDG implementation efforts in all African countries. And we also presented 5 case studies on best practices for SDG implementation. The 2020 report we are just finalizing, and it will be published in July. The special focus is on Leave No One Behind and also on the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. To go back to the theme on implementation efforts, we conducted a survey across all 54 African states, and we came up with these conclusions of where African governments stand in terms of implementing these goals. We've taken the angle of government implementation efforts because they are the primary stakeholders. It's governments and heads of states that signed on to these goals in 2015, and they have to really lead and set the stage for implementation. On the positive side, the SDGs have really been strongly endorsed by African heads of state and really incorporated into the different national strategies and national development plans. So we see really good domestication, good ownership over these goals. Unfortunately, it sort of seems to stop there, where there's been not enough analysis on how far different countries are from actually achieving these goals and what kind of transformation is necessary to bridge that gap. The financial needs are also really important, and there's been not enough analysis of actually how much it will cost in each country to successfully achieve the goal. Additionally, there has not been enough engagement of stakeholders, whether it's academia, civil society, or business. Governments haven't sufficiently reached out and involved them to raise awareness and get them involved in the implementation. As part of our survey also, we asked people to identify what they thought were the most significant challenges to achieve the SDGs, both to implement the SDGs and also to track and monitor implementation. And the lack of funding and resources was really raised across the board as the biggest challenge. So again, just to go back, the most committed areas that come out here, there are official statements in almost 90% of countries. 3/4 of countries have launched processes to map the alignment, and 2/3 of countries have identified key national priorities. So these are the most committed areas on the part of African governments with regards to SDG implementation. And the main challenges, as you can see, 11 countries. So these are of the ones that answered the qualitative questions. Really, the lack of adequate financial resources emerged, as well as lack of capacity among civil society as well as civil service, and a lack of data also emerged as a big challenge for monitoring. I wanted to talk a little bit about the methodology that we use to draw these conclusions and to explain the context for what I'm about to share in terms of where African countries stand today. We have global indicators that we've retained for the Africa Index, but we've also added many indicators that are Africa specific, some of which are also touching on the 2063 agenda. So for example, we've taken a number of indicators on regional integration and continental integration. We have criteria not only on the coverage, but also on the quality of the sources. We take official data that's been internationally harmonized, but also non-official data from academia and leading international research centers, for example, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, Transparency International, and others. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, there's still insufficient data availability and coverage, not only for certain countries, but also for certain issues. In the 2019 edition, Libya and the Seychelles, we were not able to include them because of insufficient data for the ranking. And unfortunately, many of the data points are also out of date because we're counting on household surveys that are run by international organizations on an irregular basis. And so we don't have the most timely data, but we're doing the best with what we have available. So these are the results of the index ranking. Here we have just the top 10 countries, but again, we have ranked all African countries except for Libya and the Seychelles. That's why Libya appears in gray here. The top ranking country in 2019 was Mauritius, followed by Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Cape Verde. The scores there are all sort of in the mid 60s. This is a score from 0 to 100. 100 signifies all the SDGs have been achieved, and 0 is not a single SDG has made any progress on. It's not surprising that the lowest ranking countries on the Africa Index are countries like South Sudan, the Central African Republic, and Somalia that have faced a lot of internal conflict over the years. But the best performing countries, even Mauritius and Tunisia, you know, they're very close at 66, the score. They're still only 2/3 of the way to achieving the SDGs. And a lot of what we're measuring here is the existing status of the country. There's still quite a bit of a way to go before we are close to achieving the goals. We also present in the report a dashboard where for each country, we assign a color for each goal. It's using a simple traffic light system where green means you've achieved the goal, red means you're seriously off track, and then orange and yellow are signifying, you know, varying degrees of challenges. Overall, I mean, it's difficult to see the details on this slide, but what's important to retain is that overall it does look very red and very orange. And for 13 out of these 17 goals, there's not one single country that has achieved green. As you can see, from the overall impressions here, you can see that goals 12 and 13, as well as 15, are the ones that sort of overall the continent is doing the best on. And the goals that we really have the biggest challenges on are good health and well-being, SDG 3, education, SDG 4, gender equality, SDG 5, and also SDG 16 on peace and justice. In the 2019 report, we were also able to include a trend analysis. So the dashboards that I just shared are really about where countries stand today. And this is really a projection of whether by 2030, these countries will have achieved these different goals. And unfortunately, and this goes to your question, Caleb, right now what we're seeing, the most frequently observed trend in the 2019 edition is stagnation. That means that there's not enough progress, less than 50% of the needed progress to achieve each goal by 2030. And that's really the majority of the dashboard that we're seeing. I'm sharing here an example of the Nigeria dashboard in honor of our host today at the Green Institute. So you'll see the top of the screen is the current assessment. That's where Nigeria stands today on these different goals. As you can see, we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 goals that are red. That means major, major challenges on all those red goals. Goals 4, 8, and 10 also are significant challenges. And the 3 remaining goals, so 12, 13, and 15, are only in yellow. So there are still, you know, real challenges that remain, and no goal that is currently marked in green. What's interesting is when you analyze the current assessment with the trend, so that's the dashboard that's just below, you can see that on goal 13, it looks like that Nigeria is actually on track to achieve goal 13 by 2030. However, if you look at goal 1, the situation right now is a major challenge, and you can see the trend is decreasing. That means Nigeria is seriously off track on SDG 1, on the poverty goal. And otherwise, the assessment that we made overall of stagnation also holds true here. The majority of the arrows that we're seeing here are just showing a situation of stagnation. So I just wanted to share this information from this report and invite you all to go on our website, which is africasdgindex.org, where you can explore the data for your country and download the report if you're interested also in reading a little bit more about our implementation assessment. And you're welcome to also email me if you have any questions. So I'll turn off my slides now and come back so we can have a bit more of a chat.
Okay, thanks for that, Eve. Very helpful and in fact very insightful to see all of that data and all of those details about where we are in achieving SDGs in Africa. Just a follow-up question to, I mean, you spoke a lot about data, and indeed that has been a real problem for tracking and monitoring the SDGs. So how can agencies and organizations in Africa surmount the challenges of unavailable and insufficient data to track SDG progress?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, as you say. And the first thing that needs to happen, I would say, is a real concerted investment in basic statistics at the national level. Too many countries don't have a good sense even of how many people are living in their country and where those people are. It seems so fundamental, but it's absolutely essential to have this kind of administrative data on population. And strengthening things like civil registration and vital statistics, so that when babies are born, those births are registered, and those new citizens have papers and identities so that they can also access services. That also allows policymakers to know who people are, where they are, and what services they are going to need. The last thing I would say is that we are living at a time, we're having this seminar online right now. We're living in a period of the data revolution. So as much as we have, traditional statistical systems we need to invest in, absolutely, we also have amazing access to technology, and we should be really harnessing these technologies, whether it's GIS technology that allows us to have satellite imaging, which can tell us so much information about where people are, what infrastructure exists, the forest cover, the road situation, all of these, which are part of the SDG indicators, and also the power of a mobile phone, where people can, submit, individual citizens can submit data and information, and all of these tools are available today. It's a question of really making the concerted effort to actually measure these things.
Thanks for that. You talked very much in your talk about also utilizing what we have as a country in order to push forward the SDGs. One of the things as a continent, one of the things we have in Africa is a large number of youth. What does this mean for Africa to achieve sustainable development? How can the government engage the youth to embrace sustainability?
I think there's a role on both sides, and I think this youthful population is a huge advantage that can only serve Africa in the future. The continent, as you said, is overall the youngest continent around the world, and we need to harness that youthful energy. I think we've seen such a transformation since the SDGs have been adopted that young people are really taking ownership of the agenda and identifying ways that they can make changes in their community. And that needs to be encouraged and supported. And the number one way we can also support youth is to educate them about this agenda. So real investments in education and investments in education for sustainable development, so that maybe young people who aren't yet aware of the role that they can play understand and are educated about these issues and understand how they can make an impact. It can be as small as the choices that you make in your everyday life, to as big as, starting a movement in your community or in your country.
All right, thanks for that. So my next question is around the growth model for Africa in relation to the SDGs. So there are two broad forms of economic growth models: the endogenous and the catch-up growth model. So with the endogenous, we have growth happening from within the country. There's a lot of support from government for human capital. And with catch-up growth model, we're pretty much trying to catch up with the rest of the world. Since the beginning of post-colonization, Africa has been lagging behind economically and has resorted to the catch-up. What has been the implication of this on our economy? And in an era where we emphasize equity and identify with the UN's agenda of leaving no one behind, how have developed countries aided in building a self-sustaining and more resilient Africa?
Mm-hmm. There's one word in your question that really stands out to me, and that word is equity. And I think it's not enough to point to different types of growth models and say Africa is lagging because governments put the wrong emphasis on the wrong type of growth model, or the wrong, structural adjustment that the IMF imposed. The continent was pillaged for hundreds of years and continues to be by international corporations that take out the resources and don't pay taxes and don't invest in the communities that they're being based in. So there's a real question of equity here and meaningful international solidarity, absolutely at the heart of this question for me. To address this question of more endogenous or catch-up model more directly, what I would say is that I do think that there's been an error of modeling what an economy and a society should look like on the Western model. And I think in the past couple of years, we've seen the flaws and deficiencies in this Western model. The fact that it has created huge inequalities within Western society, that the rich have gotten richer and the poor have stayed the same, and that it's all on the cost of the destruction of our environment. And I would really urge those that are decision makers in Africa and African citizens to push for a different type of growth model, a model that is built on sustainability, equity, green growth, as opposed to, pillaging and focusing on wealth, as opposed to focusing on well-being and harmony and equity.
Thanks for your thoughts. It's essentially you're saying let's leave focusing on models and actually focus on harmony and growing Africa for what it's supposed to be. My next question makes reference to the book by Adenike, the convener of this event. In the future trend of Africa, as she highlighted in her book, The Principles of Green and Sustainability Science, does focusing on the common African position, you mentioned Agenda 2063 while you were speaking, does focusing on that, on the Agenda 2063, support sustainable development, or is it another regional partisan politics?
I think there are a lot of partisan politics in the 2063 agenda. I think there's also a lot of parts of it that are difficult to measure and difficult to track, but there's overall a great deal of alignment between the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2063 agenda, though they do have very different timelines, and I do think it's important to keep that in mind. I think the blueprint for me around the world should be the SDGs, because the 2063 agenda does have some gaps when it comes to the pillars of sustainable development. But there's a lot of things that are specific to the continent, such as regional integration, free movement of people, these types of things, which are important, I think, also for the continent to be able to develop and succeed.
All right, thank you very much for that, Eve. And so, Eve, it's been great speaking to you today. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm very sure everyone learned a lot from it. It's great when we see, data on progress of Africa in respect to the SDGs and learn what we can do better. Because, like you say, there's a long road for us to go. Thank you very much for joining us. We wish you a happy World Environment Day. Please stay safe and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Caleb, for your questions. Thank you to the audience for listening. Again, if you're interested in learning more about our work, please visit the UNSDSN website or the Africa SDG Index website for more information. And please feel free to send me an email and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.